08. Live mail edit level 108. Live mail edit level 2 overview. This is a prototype dash and
Can you hear this now?
recommendation. Edit level 2 details.
And I got to figure out which one of me is going to talk at which time here.
Alt tab. Alt tab. Jaws. Alt F4. With Jaws dialog.
The funny thing is that's about 1/10 of the speed that an actual screen reader user listens at. So I'm going to talk about accessibility for Ajax. Real quickly, how many people in here have actually dealt with accessibility in their web development, just to get a feel? It's about 30%. Okay. I'm going to give you a quick definition of what accessibility is, and then I'm going to run through accessibility in Ajax. Now, it turns out that Ajax accessibility depends on the accessibility underlying HTML. So I'll talk a little bit about that and then build up specifically to what in Ajax is required in order to make it accessible. I'm sort of the Windows Live web accessibility dev guy. Been around for a while, talking to different teams, doing presentations, doing trainings, and code reviews, design reviews. So if your team is in the process of a release where you need to address accessibility, you feel like you need some training, you want somebody to help troubleshoot any problems, please feel free to contact me. Web accessibility is basically equivalent functionality for all users. Anybody that approaches the computer to use your application has to be able to access all of your functionality. Doesn't always necessarily mean in the same way that somebody else accesses it, but they have to be able to accomplish what it is that your app provides without exception. The all users part ranges from low vision users using large fonts or magnifiers, colorblind users, completely blind users using screen readers, mobility impaired users, keyboard only users, alternative input users, voice input, yada, 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 yada. It's just this plethora of devices. Lots of folks using lots of different devices. It sounds like it's kind of a testing nightmare. Fortunately, we have this thing called MSAA, Microsoft Active Accessibility, which is an API layer that sits between your application and the user. For example, a screen reader will talk to MSAA, or a Braille input device may talk to MSAA. A lot of devices, if they don't use MSAA, they will talk directly to the document object model itself. And MSAA doesn't expose the complete HTML DOM. So for example, headings, there is no MSAA representative of that. There is for push button, for links, and so forth and so on. So a lot of devices, especially screen readers, will go beyond MSAA and access the document object model directly. But the implication is, as long as you get your HTML right and do a couple of extra things for scripting in Ajax, you're going to be in pretty good shape, and you're not going to have to worry about testing all these different scenarios and devices. One thing that makes web development different from Win32 in this context is that in the web world, you're stuck with the elements, at least until web area or some variant thereof is widely implemented. Basically, the tag that you select is the role that element gets to the user. So you can't take a span and make it be a link. You have to start with a link. Okay, facets of accessibility. So in the years that we've been doing this, we kind of have tried to break it down into a framework that we can get our minds around, and we broke it down into HTML, DHTML, and Ajax. The vast majority of issues with accessibility start at the HTML layer. And the best way to get your application accessible at the HTML layer is to use the right tag, structural HTML, semantic HTML, to use tables, lists, and headings, to use the right tag for the job. DHTML builds on top of that. So you start off with the HTML, you get that right, then you have the DHTML. DHTML adds a couple of concerns. One, getting the content in the right order, and second, having any actionable things happen on an actionable element on the onClick event, which is a default event for that element. And thirdly, for Ajax, we're required to have a callback iframe navigation, which I'll talk about. Oops. Okay, HTML accessibility. Talked about the role using the right element for the job. For links, you have to use Ahref, can't use anything else. And then for buttons, use either input type button or button type button, submit, reset. For the MSA name, the inner text provides the name for buttons and all text elements, so headings, links, and so forth and so on. The label element provides the MSA name for form elements like radio buttons and text boxes and so forth and so on. And alt text, or the alt attribute, provides the name for the images. As short as that list is, that's, believe it or not, like 90% of the problems that you'll encounter. Target was recently successfully sued because they were missing some alt text on some images that made the site inaccessible. Certain key things couldn't be navigated to because the name of the image, which was required that alt text to basically tell programmatic devices what that link around that image was for, the alt text wasn't there, and so it was basically like having a link with no text on it. Start off with the first demo, which is a live search, and I just want to give an example of why these structural elements are so important. So you and I can access this page. We look at it. We see all these search results. We see these images. We see this big text. We see this green text. We see these links. And we can quickly visually process that and know exactly what we want to do. Well, a screen reader user, for example, doesn't have access to any of this visual information. So we have to provide that information structurally in the HTML, right tag for the right job, in order for the screen reader to be able to access it. Now, I'll give you an example in JAWS.
Links list dialog. Links list
Okay.
advanced 7 of 58.
So what JAWS does
Zero keys.
is it provides a list of all links. It basically builds a list of all the links on the page so that the screen reader user can quickly access that. So guy comes to the page, he knows he's looking for this link. Instead of having to tab through or get to the bottom of the document, he can just type it in and go, okay, I want the sign in. He hits,
S show more S show S C S spaces S sign in.
and he gets to the sign in. Similarly, for headings,
Heading list dialog. Headings list view. Live search :3 1 of 13. To move the items, use the arrow keys.
okay, so in live search what we do is we make every one of the results also a heading so that the user can quickly get to that. So the use of this sort of structural HTML is very, very important.
Escape link advanced. Alt F4.
Now, you're not stuck with the structure, and you can do some really great things on top of that with CSS and script. So it's not the case of, well, I have to use something and it has to look like 1996. The list has to have bullets and all that sort of thing. You can do a lot in CSS and JavaScript to make it look really great, while at the same time being structurally sound. Let me get a quick...
Alt tab. PowerPoint. Power Alt Shift tab.
Okay. So here's a quick example where you can see down here I've got this list here on the left, and I click this and I hover over, and I've got F6 support. So if I F6 and Shift F6, I can get back between sections, which is a big issue in HTML if you have a lot of links. I have arrow key support. So if I Shift F6 here, and I arrow up and down, I'm getting through all that. And if we look at the source on this, you can see that we just had a couple of lists. I think JAWS is messing up my keyboard here. There we go. So essentially, all of that was presented in what looked like a couple of tables and blocks. It was just two lists. So you do a lot with CSS on top of that and add keyboard support for arrow navigation and so forth. Here's another example, maybe a little bit more interesting. Let me go ahead and disable this, CSS. So here is one massive list. And what we've done is on top of that, put in a bunch of script. So this is arrow key support, right arrow, up, down. You can see there's some highlighting, there's all that. So even though structurally it's good HTML, it gets reported out as a list, and JAWS will actually say list to level 3, item 4. So it will report the entire semantic information about that list out to the user. So just as you and I would have it visually. So you're not really restricted aesthetically in what you can do. You just have to stick to the core HTML. And then an important point is not to modify the core tab support. So the tab just works the way a tab would, but the arrow keys on top of that allow you to add that sort of thing.
So, keep going, Peter. You got some work on the